Oh, good. Yeah. Ms. Strobel, would you like to go ahead and do a roll call? Or can we tell yet if we have a majority of the board on?
Okay, I think we can tell. Yeah, a roll call should not be necessary.
Okay, excellent. All right, we are going to go ahead and get the meeting started. I just want to remind all of the board members that it's a little more difficult for Ms. Strobel to take down the notes and document the meeting when we make motions. So make sure you identify yourself with your name whenever you make a motion, or even if you need to start speaking, so she can take the minutes properly. Okay, that said, we'll get started with the meeting. Ms. Strobel, do you want to go ahead and lead introductions?
Yes, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm going to just ask that you introduce yourselves when I call your name and state your position on the board for those present. Is Delegate Watts here yet? Okay, we'll continue down the list until Delegate Watts is in. Megan Clark.
Good morning, I'm here. I'm CA in Prince Edward County representing VACA, Virginia Association of Commonwealth Attorneys.
Thank you. Chief DeBoard.
Chief Maggie DeBoard from Herndon. I'm representing the Virginia Association of Chiefs of Police.
Thank you. Mr. Haid.
Carl Haid, Executive Secretary, Supreme Court of Virginia.
Thank you. Ms. Howard.
Good morning, Kristen Howard, Director of the Crime Commission, serving as our chair, Leader Herring's designee today.
Thank you. Mr. Hugh Young.
Hi, I'm Michael Hugh Young. I'm the criminal defense attorney representing the criminal defense attorneys on the board.
Thank you. Dr. Maha.
Yeah, I'm Dr. George Maha, and I'm representing the Scientific Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Mr. Myers.
Rich Myers. I am also representing the Scientific Advisory Committee.
And Director Miller.
Jackson Miller. I am on the board through my position as the Director of the Department of Criminal Justice Services.
Thank you. Ms. O'Halloran.
Good morning, I'm Beth O'Halloran. I'm a Deputy Executive Director at the Virginia Board of Pharmacy, a designee of Caroline Jurin.
Thank you, Ms. Senator Perry.
Good morning. Good morning, Senator Perry. I'm a designee of the Chair of Courts of Justice Committee, Majority Leader Scott Serval.
Thank you. And Colonel Settle.
Good morning. Gary Settle, Superintendent of the Virginia State Police.
Thank you. Mr. Tracy.
Good morning, everybody. Robert Tracy, representing the Virginia Office of Attorney General.
Thank you. Dr. Tony.
Denise Tony, representing the Division of Consolidated Laboratory Services.
Thank you. And Ms. Hornberger.
I'm present. Hello.
Yes, thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself for those who may not know you?
I'm so sorry. I'm Sarah Hornberger. I'm from the Office of the Attorney General, filling in for Michelle Welch today.
Thank you. And do we have Delegate Watts? Okay, not yet. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Strobel. First order of business will be the adoption of the agenda for the meeting. Can I ask for a motion? Remember, when we make motions in seconds, to announce who you are. Can I have a motion to adopt the draft agenda that all of you should have received from Ms. Strobel via email?
Mr. Chair, this is Mason Bird. I have one correction that needs to be made to the agenda. In the new business section, Ms. Jenkins will be discussing the case of Smith versus Arizona. It's Arizona versus Smith on the agenda. That needs correction.
Okay, Very good. It'll be Smith versus Arizona.
Mr. Chair, this is Megan Clark. I move that we adopt the agenda with the one correction.
I have a motion. Can I have a second?
Chief DeBoard, second.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Thank you, Mr. Board. Okay. Is there any questions about the motion? I don't think so. You would have brought it up. All in favor of the agenda being passed, will say aye.
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 Okay, it'd probably be easier to see if anyone was opposed. Are there any opposed? Thank you. The motion passes. Okay, you've also received minutes for our April 10th meeting a couple months ago. Does anyone have any proposed changes to those minutes? Are there any amendments to be made? Nobody speaking up. Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the April 10th, 2024 meeting?
Rich Myers to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Myers.
Chief DeBoard, second.
Thank you, Chief. All right. Is there anyone opposed to these minutes? I'm going to say it that way, Ms. Strobel, because I doubt there are. If there's none opposed, I assume you're all saying aye. Are there any that want to abstain from that? Very good. All right, those minutes pass. Okay, I do not have a report. I'm going to move on to Director Jackson to give her for us to hear her report. Director Jackson.
All right, thank you. Let me share my screen quickly, hopefully. All right. Hopefully you can see the slides if somebody can say yay or nay.
We can see them.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you for being here today, and I'm pleased to present some updates from DFS in my report. And I do like to start with our central laboratory construction project because it is very exciting for us to watch as this building goes up in Hanover County. Quite a lot of progress has been made since April. It continues to be on schedule and it continues to be on budget, which is always a good thing. There have been a few delays in isolated areas due to supply issues, but no issues that have affect, the overall timeline path. And so that's been encouraging. So the south wing, which is the DFS laboratory, which is the wing that's on the top of the picture, that is completely closed in now, and they are roughing in some mechanical and electrical and plumbing systems and all of that kind of stuff. And the roofing system should be largely complete within the next 4 to 6 weeks. They are also making a good deal of progress on the north wing, which is where the Office of the Chief of the Medical Examiner will be, and some group from the medical examiner's office got to go on a tour yesterday. It's been it's a little more behind than the south wing, so we waited to have them tour until there were enough roughed in walls so that they could really see what the spaces were going to look like. And so they had a really nice tour yesterday. So that's where we are with that. Our other buildings also are having some planned maintenance work done on them, particularly in the northern lab, where we will be doing some significant work through the maintenance reserve on the chillers in the building, which provide the air handling. And also, we are starting the planning process for replacing the roof on our eastern facility in Norfolk. So those are just big projects. When you own and operate these laboratory buildings, they certainly, as they age, have projects that need to be completed. At our meeting in April, the board voted for me to represent the Forensic Science Board on this new National Association of Forensic Science Boards, which you've heard Mason talk about twice now. And so I did apply for membership as directed. Chief DeBoard, who was still the chair at the time, wrote a letter stating that it was the board's intention for me to be the representative. And so I was notified that my membership had been accepted, and they immediately reached out and were excited that that folks from Virginia were going to be involved, and asked me to provide a Virginia spotlight at the upcoming conference, which is in November, because I guess staff members of the National Association of Forensic Science Board kind of spoke about Virginia just briefly at the original meeting. And so they were hopeful that I could provide information about really a better description of how our two oversight bodies, the Scientific Advisory Committee and Forensic Science Board, operate in Virginia. And so they have actually done some work, I guess, and they put out a best practices document for those who are developing state forensic science boards. And I provided the link in the spreadsheet, in the presentation, if you are interested in looking at that. It is, it really lays out a lot of things to think about, and is not necessarily prescriptive to do any particular thing. But I will keep you up to date as I participate in that body. So one of the other big things that we have talked about over the last couple of meetings, and certainly with the Scientific Advisory Committee, is the Mary Jane Burton case review. There was that budget language that was included that directed the Virginia State Crime Commission to do a review looking at numbers of cases and that type of thing. And we have been working with the Crime Commission to allow them access to all of the case files. And so that they have been in here helping and double checking to verify the numbers of cases and the numbers of suspects. And so we've identified 3,416 cases, including 4,231 named suspects at this point. And we had a truly massive mailing project that we did, and where we sent out letters to all the affected law enforcement agencies and Commonwealth's attorneys in the various localities for anyone who had a case that had been performed by Mary Jane Burton. And in those letters, we used the language that you had seen previously in the letters, and we did also include a list of the cases that were from that jurisdiction, and also the copies of the certificates of analysis, so that they could have information such as victims and suspect names and other things, agency case numbers, anything that might have been on that original certificate, to help them be able to find information about that case, so that we could learn more about conviction status. And so information regarding convictions has been, we've been getting letters, phone calls back with that information from law enforcement, from Commonwealth attorneys, and from some clerks as well. And we are certain that that will continue for a while. And we will be sharing that information with the Crime Commission as they are trying to help us put together information about that. And so our next set of notifications that we will be working on will be to notify defendants, and we will certainly prioritize those that are currently incarcerated once we have that final list from the Crime Commission. So that's kind of my report with that. And obviously Kristen is here if after my presentation you have questions that you'd like to ask her as well about their role. So just an update on our accreditation. We did have our surveillance assessment where we had a team of now 6 or 7 folks that came in from different laboratories, and they were on site at all 4 labs, May 21st to the 23rd. They did focus on controlled substances and materials trace. Those were the scientific disciplines where the technical assessors had experience. And then we had a lead assessor that was looking at overall quality management types of documentations. So we're still in the process of, we had a couple little things that they wanted us to look at, and we are currently working on those, but there were no big items that came from that assessment visit. We have had 2 customer notices that have gone out very recently that I just wanted to bring to your attention. The first is notice of our new honorarium policy. One thing that we've had folks, especially from the Commonwealth's attorneys side of things, ask about on a regular basis is how come we can't force people who leave our employment to come back and testify to support the work that they did while they were here. And obviously when somebody leaves, you no longer have control over them. And so that wasn't something that we were really able to do. And so it makes it difficult when people do not allow us to release their contact information. And so in order to try and encourage people to provide testimony to support work that they did while they were a scientist with us, we have come up with this honorarium policy. I had learned about this from a couple of other states that had something similar. And so that is, we've had it in place now for a month and a half or so, and we've already had a few scientists take advantage of this. And so we're paying basically them an honorarium of $500 a day when they come and testify. And one of the good things about this is that they are in contact with us ahead of time in order to get this honorarium. And so that makes it so that we are more able to ensure that that they have their case file that they need so that they can prepare properly for court. And so it also cuts down on requests for reanalysis, and that's a good thing because sometimes the evidence may no longer be available, and sometimes the evidence may no longer be in the same state it was when it was originally tested, and so that is good as well. So it also does apply to scientific staff who issue the certificates of instrument accuracy in our breath alcohol section. The second we just sent out on July 1st. So as of July 1st, our certificates of analysis in DNA will no longer include what people call allele tables, or they're titled a table of typing results. And that is something that we had wanted to do. Historically, we have included that information as an appendix if the forensic scientist's examination of evidence resulted in a positive probative association or a non-elimination. But due to genetic privacy concerns and scientific advancements with the DNA probabilistic genotyping, other forensic laboratories have moved away from including these types of tables, and we had wished to do that as well. But after consulting with a customer working group, it appeared that legislative changes needed to be made, and Delegate Kent carried our agency bill, which was House Bill 898, and that went into effect on July 1st, and it removed the language that talked about providing the DNA profiles in the certificate. And so those are still available. The information is still available through a subpoena ducasticum because it's in our case file, and we handle those the same way with the Commonwealth as defense attorneys. We also have released our annual report of drugs submitted to DFS in calendar year 2023. I just realized I have the same information on 2 slides, but we'll just only talk about it once. So thanks to Director Miller for allowing his folks in their research department to help us evaluate and collate our data to make this report, which is sent out each year and is used by not only law enforcement, but public health and treatment facility people, just to see the changes in the drugs that are being seen in their jurisdiction. So it has information, yet again, methamphetamine was actually the drug that was most often identified in items in calendar year, for the cases that were submitted in calendar year 2023. Methamphetamine overtook cocaine about 2-3 years ago, and fentanyl now is number 3. And so we definitely have continued to see a reduction in the amount of heroin that is submitted. You can see there in the changes of submissions from 2022 to 2023 that heroin is down significantly. And if you think about how heroin is manufactured, by having to grow fields and fields of poppies and have people harvest those poppies and get the latex with the codeine and morphine in it, off of each single poppy pod, it is so much cheaper to have a chemical compound than that heroin that requires, a significant production resources to make. And so we're certainly seeing that heroin is continuing to reduce, and fentanyl is continuing to rise. And so just looking at the illicit synthetic opioids, fentanyl obviously is the first. And I like to show this just because it shows that, it does have in the report, it has the singular year, but here showing the last 3 years, looking at fentanyl versus any of those fentanyl analogs that people talk about, we are seeing just regular fentanyl in far more often than any of the isomers. And so just to also show that the information in that report is not only by state police division, but also by court jurisdiction. And so if you're interested in looking at that for all of the different drug classes that are reported, the link was on the slide before. We are continuing to provide outreach to our customers through presenting at various conferences. Amy will be presenting at the Commonwealth Attorneys Summer Conference in Virginia Beach. Amy and I, and potentially Brad Jenkins, our DNA program manager, will also be providing information to the Virginia Chiefs of Police at their conference in Roanoke. And then Mason and I are going to be attending the Public Defenders Conference, also in Virginia Beach in October, providing, I'm going to do it twice. It's kind of an introduction to the Department of Forensic Science. We're talking about the services that we provide and some information that would be useful to probably newer public defenders. Our forensic training section. Again, this is the 50th anniversary of our Forensic Science Academy, which was created by statute in 1974. We did just graduate the 112th session just a week or so ago, and Deputy Secretary Marcus Anderson was the speaker, and that was we appreciated his willingness to come and share his thoughts with the class. And their Forensic Science Academy Alumni Association annual retraining conference will be held in Virginia Beach September 3rd through the 5th. We did recommend through that expedited scheduling process for the Board of Pharmacy, we did recommend 4 compounds for their consideration. We sent that in April, and they did consider that at their June 25th meeting, and they're pending final approval. And so there were 3 hallucinogenic compounds and 1 cannabinoid agent. And so this time there were no synthetic opioids that were recommended. We base these recommendations on cases that we see, or compounds that we see in casework. All right. Looking at our case statistics, we just finished the fiscal year, and so wanted just to look at where we were with case submissions in comparison to other fiscal years. Our drug submissions do continue to increase since the big reduction that we saw after the pandemic. It looks like they're down 16%, but that's from 2020, and so that's 2020 was a weird year, and so really I'm just focusing a little bit more on 2023 to 24 and where we have gone from there. So overall, the digital and multimedia evidence, we seem to be pretty stable. It kind of fluctuates a little bit. Firearms and tool marks has definitely decreased over the past few years. And although the largest part of the reduction in the firearm submission can be attributed to the increase in the number of NIBIN stations that are located within law enforcement, there have also been reductions in requests for firearms in comparison and comparisons of bullets and cartridge cases. And some of that can be probably attributed to the fact that because cases are, the NIBIN information is being used at the investigative stage, depending on what happens with that, it may then, that evidence that might have been associated with that may not get submitted to us for any further work being done, depending on what the outcome of an investigation is. Latent prints were pretty steady. I skipped forensic biology. In the DNA section, we do continue to see a higher level of submissions, and that is something that we are definitely working to try and address, because our turnaround times, as you will see, have definitely increased, and we are not providing the service that we need to be providing in our DNA section for getting critical information for some of the more egregious crimes in the state of Virginia. Toxicology, we have, as it says, we have finished pretty much outsourcing from the medical examiner's office, so that I think these numbers will be higher in the next year. Controlled substances, these are just for your information, but certainly our turnaround times, we are still maintaining approximately an average of about 30-day turnaround time for our controlled substances cases, which is right where we want to be. In digital and multimedia evidence, some of the turnaround times are higher, but we do have 2 examiners that have just completed training a month ago, and so we are now back at full staff, and so hopefully we can work through these. Although sometimes the turnaround times are going to be higher for certain digital and multimedia evidence cases, just due to the nature of the evidence, as they sometimes will leave something like a mobile device. If we're trying to brute force unlock that, it may stay on that unlocking device for several months as the program kind of chugs through its algorithm process trying to open the device. So again, I was talking about firearms and tool marks, how we have over time been receiving less cases, but our turnaround times continue to be a little bit high. And we do have quite a few folks in the firearm section that are in training or in the hiring process. So we have 3 forensic scientists currently that are in training. They are about halfway through their 24-month training program and are completing the tool mark portion of their training right now, and will then move to focus on the firearms. We have 2 more forensic scientists in firearms that are in the hiring process. One starts July 25th, and the other we are still doing interviews. We also have 1 supervisor position that is now in recruit in our Western laboratory. So we're currently transferring cases to normalize the backlog while we are looking to add to the capacity with all these folks in training. But we're also working to reinstate firearms examinations in our Western laboratory. Currently, we are not performing comparison exams in Western as we work through a corrective action. In addition, that Western forensic scientist supervisor retired, at the one that's now in recruit. She retired prior to completing all of the return to work activities laid out by the corrective action process. And therefore, we did send a notification out to all Commonwealth attorneys through the Commonwealth Attorney Services Council just this past week to alert them of her status. So forensic biology, I've talked previously about our physical evidence recovery kit processing unit that we are putting together. All of the 5 staff members for that, including the 2 that we just got approval for in the FY25 budget, are all hired and now in training. And the 2 new positions, one in Western and one new, in Northern, that we received in this particular budget are still in the hiring process. We're also investigating potential for outsourcing. So with DNA outsourcing, we are working to put out a bid for a testing contract with a private laboratory. So we're working on preparing that requirements document to go through the procurement process. We plan to outsource cases that are like non-persons cases. So we would not be sending out things like homicides and sexual assaults. Those would all be done in-house. They're more likely to need someone to testify about the results. And we would plan to outsource cases from all locations. So we anticipate that any case that is outsourced, that the outsource lab would be the one to prepare their own certificate of analysis. They would send us back the certificate, and then we would forward that on to law enforcement. And so whoever submitted the evidence. So certainly before any of that gets put in place, we will send out a customer notice to distribute the details of exactly what types of cases we will be sending, and also how people can get copies of either the contract or any other information that they might need. With Leighton Prince, as I said, we are pretty stable. We do have a couple of forensic scientists in the hiring process, and that seems to be normal attrition. Toxicology, we have 2 toxicologist trainees that are going to be starting in the next month, and that will get us closer to being fully staffed with toxicologists, and we will only be needing 1 in the Western laboratory. We do have a central toxicologist trainee who is scheduled to finish this week, and a forensic scientist out in Western who's also scheduled to finish by the end of July their training. So we are doing much better being fully staffed in toxicology. In trace evidence, that is a little bit different story. We've had a couple of retirements and a couple of people that have been hired out of the section. And so we do have a considerable number of people who are doing some type of training in trace evidence. In trace evidence, it's a little different because there are so many different subdisciplines like glass and fire debris and hairs and fibers that people are generally trained on 4 or 5 of those subdisciplines. And so we are training folks to add in some of the subdisciplines where we have lost that capability due to people leaving the section. All right, budget and resources. We did end the year with a balance of $2.8, almost $2.9 million. That did include the 2.3 something million dollars that was carried over from fiscal year 23 to pay for the new evidential breath alcohol instruments. I had reported to you before that we do anticipate that we are going to be requesting to carry over that money again to fiscal year 25 due to the slow nature of this procurement process. because we were not able to get delivery of those instruments before the end of fiscal year 24. This procurement for the new evidential breath instruments has taken on a life of its own. We're still in the process, but we have been working with VITA since these instruments do send information into the Commonwealth of Virginia network. We've been working with the VITA security people to evaluate each of the bidding instruments to make sure that they are going to meet the VITA requirements for security. And so we are getting towards the end of that process, but we have not yet awarded the contract. So for our biennial budget for fiscal year 25-26, these are just the increases to our budget from previous years. These forensic biology positions, I've already spoken about. Increasing the staffing for evidence receiving. Basically, that is to create 3 full-time positions and get rid of 3 wage positions so that we can have better trained and hopefully staff that will stay longer in evidence receiving. And so those positions are in process of being filled as we speak. And funding for the very much increased subscription services to the tools we use in digital multimedia evidence to unlock cellular devices. And then lastly, the forensic laboratory specialist that was included in one of the budget amendments for us to be able to screen high alcohol DUI cases for drugs or drug classes and then report the results back to the General Assembly so that they could have a better idea of what drugs are found in folks that get pulled over for DUI that have high alcohol. All right, we do have 2 actions that are needed by the board relating to grant applications. So both of these grants we've already applied for these grants. Those went out to the chair and vice chair for their approval prior because it was between meetings. But now, if approved, we would need approval to accept the funds if awarded. And so these are both block grants from the federal government, from BJA. One is the DNA Capacity Enhancement and Backlog Reduction Act, which you can see is quite a large chunk of money. And we have about 5 or 6 scientists who are their salary and benefits are paid from this grant. And also a lot of our supplies and some of our equipment is paid off of this grant in the DNA section. So this is a little over $2 million. And the other one, I'll go ahead and just talk about briefly in case you want to act on them together. You can decide. But the other is the annual Paul Coverdell Forensic Science Improvement Grant. And this is something that actually goes through our state administrating agency, which is DCJS, sorry. And this funding is available to both us, DFS, and to the medical examiner's office. And so we have an agreement with them where we split it, since this is one of the few grants that the OCME is actually eligible to apply for. And so we have applied for our portion of that, which is just over $250,000. And most of that funding we use for continuing education of our staff in the sections that are not DNA. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'll pass that back to Chairman Miller.
Does anybody have any questions for Director Jackson on her report or about either of these 2 grants before the board?
This is Senator Perry.
Go ahead, Senator.
I'm not going to sort of derail the meeting here, but I would like to request from Amy and maybe Kristen just maybe a briefing offline, more thorough briefing and update on the Mary Jane Burton, sort of where we are and where we're going. But again, I don't want to derail the meeting here today.
Yes, Kristen Howard, certainly Senator Perry. I can give a very brief update and more than happy to talk to you after the meeting, or we can schedule something to get more in depth if you'd like. We have been working with DFS and they have been pulling numerous files for us. We've had staff members over there for weeks at a time. We've reviewed hundreds of files at this point and also cross-validated those files. We focused on two categories, the priority being those who are incarcerated. We're around 100 individuals initially identified, but we needed more information to provide PII to DOC so that they could have the matching information so that we made sure we had the right person convicted of the case that Mary Jane Burton worked. So we have reviewed all of those. We provided DOC with all of that information. So they are working right now as we speak to make those matches so that we can make those notifications. So we anticipate that happening very soon. We've also reviewed all of the case files where there was an indication of testimony by Mary Jane Burton and have cross-validated those. We're going to be working next through the cases involved in the post-conviction notification project, since those files have already been pulled and are in the lab. So we're working to have staff over there to do that. We have some students who have volunteered, so we'll have some extra hands this summer. So we should be able to move through them fairly quickly and get as much information from those files. That I can go in more detail, but that's kind of the high level. We're making good progress on everything, and DFS has been working very diligently to pull files as we've been requesting them.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I know we went over this, some months ago now. Actually, I think some of my other concerns are about, the Mary Jane Burton training other individuals, and what are we doing about those cases? What's the review of those? And a couple of other things that we sort of touched on back then that I haven't heard an update on, that I feel like I have an obligation to follow up on. So, but I'm happy to talk to you about it offline. And I certainly appreciate the efforts. I know that they're long and lengthy and arduous to try to address the issue. But again, I don't intend to derail the meeting. Just want to follow up. Thank you.
Certainly. I'll touch base with your office so we can schedule something.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Is there any member of the board who believes they will not be able to vote for either the CEBR or the Coverdell Grant Program? Otherwise, we can, if someone needs to vote no on one of them and yes on the other, please let me know now. And
Chairman
if
Miller?
not, oh, sorry, go ahead.
This is Mason Bird. We might want to split these into two votes. I see that the Coverdell also includes DCJS, and I didn't know if you wanted to recuse yourself from that vote.
Yeah, I don't think I need to recuse myself. This
Okay,
is
thank you.
basically that's basically what we do. Mr. Bird, is we hand out the money. Well, we take it in and hand it right back out. There's no conflict whatsoever there.
Thank you, sir.
No problem. If that's not the case, I'll take a motion for us to approve both the CEBR and the Coverdell grant.
This is Senator Perry. I'd make a motion to approve both grants.
Megan Clark will second.
We have a motion from Senator Perry and a second from Ms. Clark. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
And is there anyone opposed to the Department of Forensic Science accepting either of these grants? Didn't think so. Thank you. All right, we're going to move into old business, and I'm going to call on Ms. Jenkins to give us an update on the regulatory requirement reduction action plan.
Hey, Mr. Miller, I think Dr. Tony had her hand raised.
I'm sorry, Doctor.
That's okay. Linda, I just had a quick question for the situation where you are looking to contract out some of the DNA testing. If those do go to trial, would your office represent or defend the data, or would that be the responsibility of the contracting laboratory?
No, that would definitely, we would certainly not be able to testify about their results. And even less so now probably than before. No, when we did this with the drug testing, we did reanalyze the small number of cases that went to court where somebody was needed to testify. We actually reanalyzed those so that we could provide a someone to be able to testify from DFS. And so with DNA, it's more likely that we'll have to evaluate the evidence to see whether or not reanalysis is viable, or whether or not we would ask the person from the laboratory who tested it to provide that testimony.
Mr. Chair, permission to speak. This is Megan.
Go ahead.
Ms. Jackson, I know it probably goes without saying, but I just feel like I need to say on behalf of prosecutors, having to subpoena out-of-state witnesses is quite a task. And sometimes things get where they should be, sometimes they don't. So I was very happy to hear that on the, at least on the sex assault cases and homicides, we wouldn't be doing that. But if that's something that we could always keep in mind for trial purposes, because absolutely we have to have the analyst there.
Understood. I appreciate that.
Okay, I don't see any more hands raised. All right, Ms. Jenkins, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to respond back to Ms. Clark to some degree. Certainly, I know the out-of-state subpoenas are difficult, but part of the contracting for any of that outsourcing includes a requirement that they support their cases coming back into Virginia court. So if there were an issue with that, we certainly could move to enforce that contract with them. And in the past, when we've had issues, they've been very willing to come to court to support their caseload. So with that said, I will bring you up to speed about the ongoing action. You all might recall that this fast track regulation action was passed by the board last meeting on April 10th. It is in response to and part of the ongoing response by the board to Executive Order 19, which is Governor Youngkin's initiative to reduce the number of discretionary regulatory requirements that are in state regulations. And we have been working very diligently to scout what few regulations we actually have to try to remove any discretionary requirements that we're able to remove. This is an action for 6 VAC 4040. It's the arrestees regulations for DNA samples for arrestees. And it's a very brief amendments to two sections in that reg that remove requirements as far as filling out a form for law enforcement for the submission of DNA samples for arrestees, really encouraging them to utilize our DB-SATS, the DNA Data Bank Sample Tracking System, rather than filling out a hand form to submit in with those buccal swabs that are coming in. Not only will it be effective for the officers not having to handwrite those forms, but we're also hoping it will help the staff in being able to effectively decipher handwriting coming in from law enforcement officers, because they'll be able to use the pre-logged portion of DB-SATS in order to pull up all that data that they need for these buccal samples. So that was approved in April. It really was just submitted into the administrative process. There are a number of forms that have to be filled out with regs, including an economic impact form. I will confess to, as a lawyer, not being great at math. So that is a struggle for me. But we did get those submitted, and it is now in front of the Attorney General's office for their review and has just been up there for a week, so it hasn't been very long. I anticipate it will go through the process pretty quickly though. And the goal is to hopefully have that in place either by the end of 2024 or the end of 2025, as I'm not thinking that it is going to be any issue, which is why it was fast tracked. So that's where we currently are, and I'll keep you up to date as it moves through the system.
Any questions for Ms. Jenkins? I see no hands being raised. Thank you very much, Ms. Jenkins. Does anyone else have any old business to bring before the board? I'm going to move on to new business. I'm going to call on Ms. Ballard to provide an update on the FBI rapid DNA guidelines. Ms. Ballard? You're on mute. Oh, there you go.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman
morning.
Miller. I apologize. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you let me know if that was successful?
Appears to be.
Okay, perfect. My name is Elizabeth Ballard. I'm the Assistant Biology Program Manager, and I'm going to present on the rapid DNA testing program and some potential updates to the QAS standards that we expect to be coming in the near future. To date, Virginia has not made the decision to implement rapid DNA testing, but I will provide some potential implications, some potential implications if we were to choose to incorporate rapid into our testing in the future. So just a quick overview for those of you who are unfamiliar. I'm sure you've heard that what rapid DNA testing is in general. The instruments are considered mobile instruments, and they are about the size of an extra large microwave oven or a little bit larger. They are able to generate a DNA profile in approximately 2 hours. The original vision of rapid DNA testing was that individual booking stations across the country would house these instruments and allow law enforcement to take an arrestee sample during the booking process, develop a DNA profile from that arrestee, and search a particular subset of samples in the National DNA Data Bank while the arrestee is still being held. And those samples are unsolved forensic profiles from homicides, rapes, terrorism acts, and also kidnapping. So the entire data bank is not searched. It's just this index of special concern is how they are marked. Eventually, that arrestee sample would be uploaded and searched against the full National DNA Data Bank if it was eligible. The state of Virginia has not chosen to implement a booking station program as of yet. And there are multiple reasons for that. One of the reasons is that we do not carry a backlog of our arrestee samples. Virginia prioritizes and analyzes arrestee samples as they come in. So any hit that would occur during a booking process will still occur in Virginia within about 1 week. And in addition, there is some financial implication to implementing a booking station policy in the state of Virginia, certainly for very small jurisdictions peppered throughout the state. If they have their own individual booking station, they would have to purchase and maintain the instrument. And the cartridges that are used expire, and many times they don't have arrestees that qualify for that process often enough to justify that cost. The next expansion of the rapid DNA testing that we are expecting to come along is to expand that processing to evidence samples. Right now, the only samples that are eligible for entry or searching into the National DNA Data Bank, the CODIS system, are known reference DNA samples from individuals. But right now, there is a draft set of the FBI quality assurance standards that are under revision. They were provided for public comment in June of this year. That review window has closed as of July. And we anticipate that those new finalized version of the quality assurance standards should be produced and published hopefully within 2025, possibly even into 2026. That program, that expansion is intended to allow for samples of an evidentiary nature that are processed by what we would deem a partner agency or a law enforcement agency, could be searched and uploaded into the state and national databases. And so I'm going to go over a little bit about what the implications of that would mean. That would be. So the rapid DNA testing itself would be conducted by what the standards refer to as, the draft standards refer to as a partner agency. So it is a law enforcement agency that would have these machines, these rapid instruments, and they could be testing evidence profiles at a fixed location, such as a police station, or they could use these instruments as a mobile crime scene unit, take it to a crime scene and process evidence samples. Regardless of how they choose to do that, if this were implemented, every site that uses these machines, these instruments, would need to be included in our laboratory scope of accreditation and also be included in our QAS or quality assurance standard audits and the process. The end result, though, would be that evidence DNA profiles generated by law enforcement could be eligible for searching and entry into the national and state databases. So from the crime laboratory's perspective, what would need to happen if this were to be implemented would be, first, we would need to add a rapid DNA program into our scope of accreditation. Per the draft standards, the laboratory would be required to create a DNA administrator who would be responsible for administration and security of the rapid DNA process or program. It would also require validation testing, the development of new procedures, the development of the training programs for both the laboratory staff and our partner agencies that are involved. And it would also require participation in proficiency testing. The laboratory would have to conduct data review on the DNA profiles that were developed by these partner agencies, and also we would need to issue certificates of analysis. For the partner agencies or the law enforcement agencies, they would be required by the standards per the draft to establish a forensic rapid DNA lead operator. They also would be responsible for the routine maintenance and the quality control of the instruments, and they also would have to ensure compliance with our procedures and our policies. They would have to maintain documentation and an evidence control program and ensure the integrity of the evidence. And again, each of the sites that would be involved in creating these profiles or developing these profiles for our review would have to be included in our auditing process. The agency would also need to sign an MOU with our laboratory. So if this process were implemented, the first thing that would need to happen is that the QAS, the quality assurance standards, need to be finalized and published so that we can review them and make sure that we would meet them. When the QAS are finalized, it is expected that new chips for the instruments will be released for purchase. These new chips differ from the current chips being used in that they allow for the analysis of lower level or evidentiary type samples. The current chips are made to allow for the development of DNA profiles from high level samples and also good quality DNA, fresh buccal samples, whereas these new chips would allow for the development of a DNA profile from potentially degraded or smaller amounts of DNA. And also they include multiple internal controls that are required by the quality assurance standards. We would also need to have some DFS staff training on the instruments. We would have to do validation testing ourselves on the instruments and determine what samples or DNA profiles would be suitable for searching and upload, and also identify the limitations of the system. So currently, Virginia does have 2 agencies that have purchased rapid DNA instruments. Virginia State Police owns an Andy brand instruments, and then Fairfax Police Department has purchased the Thermo Fisher version of these instruments. One way in which those agencies are using these instruments is to screen large numbers of items of evidence at crime scenes to determine the most probative or most important pieces to then submit to the laboratory for analysis. And they are also using them without laboratory involvement for body identification cases. And both agencies have had a number of rapid DNA successes. the profiles, again, though, that are developed from any kind of evidentiary sample that the police, state police or Fairfax police develop from these instruments are not currently eligible to be entered or searched in CODIS. That's all I have for today. So I'm happy to try to answer any questions that the board might have. Or then I whatever you would like.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Ms. Ballard? Great, thank you for the presentation, Ms. Ballard. I'm going to bring Ms. Jenkins back to give us an update on Smith versus Arizona.
Thank you again. I wanted to bring the board up to speed about this decision of the U.S. Supreme Court. It was argued in January, so both the Commonwealth's attorneys and the defense attorneys and the forensic scientists were all aware that this was brewing, and there were concerns about what the holding might be and the implications of that holding to basically both surrogate testimony, as we'll discuss, and also to batch processing, depending upon how the court chose to proceed with this. There has been a lot of, I guess, different interpretations since Williams v. Illinois came down previously from the U.S. Supreme Court about who exactly is needed to be able to testify to forensic findings if the original examiner is unavailable. And this was one of those situations coming out of Arizona where Mr. Smith was charged with several drug offenses. The original examiner had produced a report and then had left the Arizona Department of Public Safety. So Arizona, in trying the case, had put on a different DPS analyst to testify as its expert witness. That expert witness testified coming to the same conclusions as the original examiner regarding what the substances were that were seized from Mr. Smith's property, and testified that he used the original report and notes of the first analyst that had left DPS. So that presented to the U.S. Supreme Court the question of whether the Confrontation Clause under the Sixth Amendment allowed this use of substitute expert testimony or surrogate expert testimony to convey the testimonial statements of a non-testifying forensic analyst, was how the question was poised. It was argued on January 9th or 10th, I believe, and the government that was not, the U.S. government that was not a party to this actually weighed in as an amici and argued because of the implications for this across the country with forensic laboratories. The final opinion came down at the end of June. They always like to drop these big opinions right before vacation time. And they held that the absent analyst statements basically were utilized by that expert that was testifying to come to his opinion, and that they were necessarily had to be true to support his statements. So they basically said, look, if the expert is relying on the statements of another forensic examiner, then necessarily he is relying on them because they're true to come to the conclusion that that drug is in fact cocaine or whatever they might be testifying to. And because Arizona had somewhat stipulated that the out-of-court statements of that analyst were testimonial, the court held off of deciding that particular issue, but remanded it back to the Arizona courts to determine if those statements were in fact testimonial as well. And if so, that would be a Confrontation Clause violation. As I said, Arizona had arguably already conceded the issue, so I'm not certain exactly how that's going to pan out on return to the Arizona courts. The the substitute testimony that was done here from a lab counsel perspective, I would have never have encouraged or recommended prosecutors to do. I think it's very clearly a Melendez or Bull Cumming issue. And this was a very difficult case to have going up to the court, particularly because the record was so bad coming out of Arizona, which I think was pretty much discussed in the oral argument by all of the parties involved, how bad the record was. So I don't see the implications for this for DFS as far as substitute testimony, because I think we would move to try to do some sort of re-exam rather than doing a straight up substitute testimony like what occurred here in Arizona. But the concern is how far this extends. And that's really what's the subject of debate among the lab lawyers and other forensic lab people is how far does this extend, and what is of particular concern to the agency is batch processing, which we utilize in a number of disciplines, including toxicology and DNA pretty extensively, and then in other disciplines as well. So I have been working with the Commonwealth's attorneys to try to work through whether the implications to batch processing. There have been a number of times throughout the course of this progeny of cases or line of cases from the Supreme Court where they have talked about batch processing and indicate that they understand that it occurs, and indicated that as long as the final examiner that is giving the conclusion in the report is in the chair and has reviewed all of the data and come to those conclusions themselves, that's not a problem to a number of the different members of the Supreme Court. But obviously we've had changes in the court and not real clear entirely how everyone would come down on that particular issue. So we're going to continue to work with the Commonwealth's attorneys to eliminate batch processing. Would be catastrophic would come to mind. Director Jackson's shaking her head. Also, what would be catastrophic is having the prosecutors decide that they want to subpoena everyone who touches a piece of evidence in toxicology. So really, we've got to find a path forward that permits batch processing to continue for those disciplines without having a serious and significant impact to the agency. And to all forensic laboratories across the country, because we are not the only forensic laboratory. Most forensic laboratories across the country do some form of batch processing. The Virginia Supreme Court has taken up this issue previously in Aguilar versus Commonwealth. It was a case that was actually remanded back to the Virginia Supreme Court right after Melendez-Diaz was handed down, and the Supreme Court indicated that they had no concerns with batch processing at that time. So the only consideration would be is whether the additional line of cases would change that. But I've been doing a considerable amount of research that shows that many, both federal and state courts, have considered batch processing and do not see it to be implicated. Again, if you have that final examiner taking all of the information, coming to the conclusions and being available to testify and be cross-examined on those issues, and that preserving the defendant's right to confront and cross-examine. So that's a very in-depth, not really in-depth, legal analysis of Smith v. Arizona. So I can answer any questions you all might have.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Is there any questions about Smith versus Arizona that Ms. Jenkins might be able to answer somebody? All right, seeing none. Thank you again, Ms. Jenkins, for the update. I'm now going to move to the public comment section. Is there anyone here from the public that would like to make comments to the Department of Forensic Sciences Board? Hearing and seeing no one. Moving on, I am going to confirm to everyone that our next meeting will be on October 9th, 2024 at 9:30 a.m. Mr. Byrd or Director Jackson, to confirm that's going to be at your all's location?
That's correct.
That's what I thought. It will be in person in Richmond, so I hope to see everybody there in October. All right, this concludes our agenda for the day, board. Thank you everyone for attending. We do appreciate it. And can I have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair, this is Megan Clark, so moved.
Megan Clark moves to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Rich Myers.
George Maha will second.
All right, we got a couple motions a second. I heard Mr. Myers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And
Aye.
if there's anyone opposed, I'm going to overrule you anyway. So that said, the motion passes. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your attendance. I know
you.
Director Jackson appreciates it as well. And we will see
Very much.
everybody on October 9th.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
thank you.